this lecture, we will talk about business process reengineering, which is a formalized approach through which we can rethink and drastically redesign the business processes of a company so to improve critical performances, such as, for example, cost or quality. Business process reengineering is in fact defined as a structured approach for implementing organizational and managerial innovation aimed at the radical improvement of the company performances through the redesign of the business processes. From the definition, we can derive the three key elements of business process reengineering that from now on we will call BPR. First, BPR is an approach implying planned organizational change, which therefore consists in a specific set of phases and activities supported by techniques and methods based also on specific measurement and parameters. Second, it is juxtaposed to incremental approaches because it is aimed at achieving radical improvements of performances. It does not take into consideration the constraints deriving from the current as-is situation of the company, but it is focused on the to-be situation, designed with the objective of significantly improving performances. Third, it focuses on the redesign and improvements of the business processes of the company as the primary tool to improve the performances. In other words, it is a process-oriented approach which takes into consideration both primary and support processes and also processes that are transversal to more than one organization. In addition, we must underline that BPR implies the use of information systems. A BPR intervention focuses not only on the redesign of the business processes, but also on the introduction or redesign of the information systems that support those processes. We put emphasis on the fact that BPR is a planned, structured process. The macro phases of this planned approach to radical process redesign are mainly two: the development of the new strategic vision and the design and implementation of the intervention. These two macro phases are in line with the macro phases of a radical change management intervention at a more general level. Let's now see in details which are the specific activities of each macro phase of a BPR intervention. For the development of the new strategic vision, the company should start from perceiving the need for change. For example, the increasing of the market competitiveness or the worsening of critical performances such as quality may activate a control light for the management. Once this need is perceived, the management should analyze the strategy to be pursued, evaluating strengths and opportunities, and develop the vision of the new process orientation, identifying which are the processes targeted by the intervention, the opportunities and constraints, and identifying goals and targeted performances. Management should also define what will be the program of the intervention, with the identification of the areas to work on and of the priorities and timelines. A key phase consists in the preparation of the company towards the change to be implemented, with communication about the intervention and the so-called unfreezing of the current status quo and way of doing things. This is the very end of the first macro phase. The organization can now start with the design and the implementation of the redesign intervention. This macro phase can imply more than one project, following all the same sub-phases but focusing on different areas. Let's imagine a manufacturing company that wants to develop the vision of a BPR intervention aimed at improving the technical assistance to customers, creating a new dedicated organizational unit and using new available Internet of Things technologies. The BPR intervention may have to target different areas, such as the technical area and the customer service. Consequently, at least two different projects for design and implementation should be put in place, one dedicated to the technical area and one dedicated to the customer service. Then, the design and implementation for each project should occur, starting from the definition of the team working on each project, and in case of multiple parallel projects, also the identification of the program manager. Truth to be told, all these phases and activities mentioned so far are typical of all the radical change interventions. What characterizes specifically BPR approach is how we design the new organization, with the following phases: mapping of the processes, analysis of the performances, diagnosis of the processes, and redesign of the processes. Mapping of the processes consists in identifying all the processes that could be involved from the change intervention and in the detailed representation of the processes that need to be redesigned. Usually, the higher level mapping already takes place during the development of the strategic vision. Analysis of the performances aims at identifying the gaps between the targeted levels and the current levels of performances. In doing so, we must carry on benchmarking analysis on the best level of performances showed in the market on specific dimensions of interest. For example, thinking about technical assistance in a manufacturing company, the benchmark could identify what is the fastest competitor on the market in fixing technical problems through after-sale customer service, and consequently identify which is the targeted level of that specific performance. We talk in details about different dimensions for performances in a dedicated lecture. What is important to mention here is that in a BPR intervention, once we have identified the key performances, we need to identify the key performance indicators, or KPIs, that allow us to measure those performances. For example, number of requests of intervention, cost per intervention, or average time per intervention. We then need to select a limited number of KPIs among the most robust, relevant, and measurable indicators to be analyzed and compared with performances of the so-called best-in-class identified with the benchmarking. Diagnosis of the processes has the objective of understanding which are the reasons behind the performance gaps. We can use specific guidelines or tools that support this process. One possible schema to follow is to analyze 5 main determinants and for each one identifying main areas of improvement. The 5 determinants are the different workflows of the activities, the organization in terms of microstructure, macrostructure, and coordination, the competencies and the saturation of resources along the process, how performances are planned and controlled, and the supporting IT technologies. Redesign of the processes consists in identifying alternatives for the new processes in order to fix the problems highlighted with the diagnosis. Also for this phase, we can refer to specific methodologies or tools that can help in generating alternatives. Finally, the so identified intervention should be evaluated in terms of cost and risk of implementation, but also in terms of organizational impact and potential resistance to change. Last steps are actual implementation, usually starting with a pilot test involving only a small part of the organization or just one process, and the institutionalization of the new modus operandi.